Chapter 1. The documentary that you just saw is clearly about a genocide. Can you name that genocide? I'll give you some hints. It took place in Europe during World War II. It had concentration camps and was Nazi approved. Nope, this wasn't the Holocaust. This was in fact the Jasenovac genocide by the Croatians against the Serbians. The clip you watched earlier is from a documentary called Jasenovac. It is a 16-minute production created by directors and writers Gustav Gavrin and Costa Lavati. The documentary was produced by the Film Company of Democratic Federative Yugoslavia and Regional Board of Croatia. The crew on the film were Croatians. As you saw in the mini clip, Jasenovac concentration camp was the largest concentration camp and extermination camp in Croatia during World War II. Many reviewed the documentary as a true horror film that shows man's inhumanity to man. Chapter 2. What is genocide? The UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide defined the term as having the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. While the official definition of genocide is as such, popular genocide theorists feel the need to add more to the definition. For instance, Benji over here, an associate professor of government at Dartmouth College, calls it mass killing. Michael, a professor of sociology at the University of California, calls it murderous ethnic cleansing. Rommel, professor of political science at the University of Hawaii, calls it democide. Crane, professor of political science and international relations at the College of Worcester, calls it state-sponsored mass murder. Finally, Lemkin, a Polish lawyer, calls it a destruction of ethnic group. All the definitions provided by these theorists can be seen in this genocide. Mass killing, state-sponsored mass murder, ethnic cleansing. But what was the argument among the Serbians and the Croatians about? What was their historical background? This leads to chapter 3.
The key to understanding why a genocide took place and how this fits into the destroy them to save us theory lies deep within the region's history. To give you a geographical idea of a non-existent nation, the country shaded in red make up the former Yugoslavia. This part of Europe is called the Balkans. For simplicity's sake, due to the complexity of the situations that transpired, we'll focus on 3 out of the 6 republics. Croatia, Bosnia, and Serbia enjoyed sovereignty for centuries before the 16th century when it came under influence by the Habsburg monarchy in Central Europe. Eventually it was incorporated into the Austro-Hungarian borders and its populace became predominantly Catholic. Croatians would remain part of Austro-Hungary until the end of World War I. Serbia was its own entity up until the 14th century. By then it was heavily influenced by the Byzantine Greeks and thus became predominantly Orthodox by religion. After the 14th century, it was conquered by the Ottoman Empire, and Serbia would spend the next 400 years under a foreign flag. Bosnia is a little tricky in comparison to the others. In the Middle Ages, it was settled by Slavic people, just like Croatia and Serbia. By the 10th century, it was completely Christianized. However, Bosnia eventually found themselves in a tug-of-war between Hungary and the Byzantine Empire, and borders changed very often. That is, until it was conquered by the Ottomans. Within 400 years of Ottoman occupation, most Bosnians converted to Islam, while also inhabited by Catholic Croats and Orthodox Serbs. By the late 19th century, Austro-Hungary incorporated Bosnia after defeating the Ottomans. Confused yet? Let's take a look at this map. The orange represents Croatians, the blues are Serbians, and the middle is a vibrant mix of the two, including Bosnian Muslims. After World War I, these 3 countries and 3 others formed into one nation, Kraljina Yugoslavia, the very unstable kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes. The kingdom's emblem symbolically represents just how dominant the Serbs were, not to mention they were ruled by a Serbian dynasty. It was a cooperative endeavor, so the larger European powers could no longer bully the South Slav. The kingdom was dominated by Serbian politicians, and the rest of the country saw a vague familiarity from the former oppressors, which led to the creation of right-wing groups who sought eradication of the others and total dominance over the Balkans. After almost 600 years of dominance, it is understandable that ethnic tension mixed with 20th century nationalism leads to a very sensitive population. During World War II, Yugoslavia fell under the Axis. Serbia was occupied by Germany while Croatia struck a deal with the Führer himself and became a puppet state while incorporating the multi-ethnic Bosnia in its borders. All this eventually leads and contributes heavily to the genocide.
Chapter 4. Genocide. Its characteristics, reasons, ideology, logic, and modern theories. Characteristics. Genocide generally tends to be group selective and group destructive. Rather than attack against an individual, genocide is aimed at a particular group of people and is simply indiscriminate. Those attacking, for instance, Croatia against the Serbians, aim for complete destruction of group. They do not intend to simply harm the other. Of course, the reason for genocide seems like an unnecessary topic. Why would anyone have any logical reason to mass murder an entire society of people? But for education's sake, let's look at it. One of the most popular reasons for genocide is intergroup prejudice. As seen in Chapter 3, the Croatians and Serbians hated each other for too long. Croatians felt the Serbians had too much power and needed to be erased. Robert Melson, professor of political science at Purdue University, argued that a combination of revolution and war is a cauldron for genocide. Benjamin Jay, an American political scientist who studies the survival and breakdown of political regime, believe governments are most likely to perpetrate mass killing when they are fighting insurgencies. The Croatians joined the Nazi regime to save themselves. While they were expecting to kill Jews, they went further to kill Serbians, feeling the Serbians were a much greater threat for themselves. Jacques Semlin is a French historian, psychologist, and political scientist, and the founder of the online Encyclopedia of Mass Violence. His theory on reason for genocide states that a state's desire for purity toughens this identitarian framework, a framework within which the process of violence will take shape. He believes racial purity is a country's excuse to begin genocide, labeling the other as dirty, foreign, corrupt, and treacherous. He also states that a crucial stage of preparing for a genocide is by instilling fear and panic. In this case, Croatia has inherited new borders with a sizable Serbian minority. The idea of a greater Serbian no longer frightened the Croatians. Rather, the method of inciting fear took a more practical turn when people realized they had enemies within their borders. So they began a new panic that a resistance could threaten the fascist government in Croatia and the entire region's stability. Many theorists have tried to justify the act of genocide and have come up with the country ideologies which may provide further reasoning for such heinous act. Eric Waits, for instance, stated leaderships who commit genocide are revolutionary, and they imagine a future with pure, homogeneous population. He believes that leaders' visions affect the visions of the state and how the state defines enemies and strategic objectives. Semlin believes the ideological vision respond strategically to perceived threats. Thus, if Croatian leader Ante Pavelic believes that destroying the Serbians will bring about good for the Croatian people, his nation's people will take Serbia as enemy and genocide is a feasible strategy.
When looking at the logics of genocide, it seems defensible that while genocide may not be the initial choice of perpetrators, and while it may be self-defeating as a strategy, at some point in time it becomes a deliberate policy, a strategy. If the objective in genocide is group destruction, that suggests an important contrast to the logics of other forms of violence. In genocide, negotiation, control, surrender, and submission are off the table. The perpetrating organization pursues destruction as the best available strategy. Henceforth, the perpetrating organization, in this case Croatia, pursues group destruction as the best available strategy. The documentary clip shows concentration camps used for the group destruction of Serbians. The phenomenon tends to occur in highly acute crises, in particular war, in which political authorities deploy mass violence in response to the perceived threats that they face. and the phenomenon tends to occur when political elites are committed to ideologies that either create utopian expectations or that define illegitimate members of a political community in categorical terms. In the documentary, it could be seen that the Croatians had separated illegitimate members of its new territory as the Serbians, Gypsies, and Jews. Coming up are some other details from other parts of the video. Looking back at these theories, the Jasenovac documentary was able to provide Genocide's characteristics when it explained the group selection and destruction of Serbians, Gypsies, and Jews. Genocide's reason when pointing out that fascist power of the Ustashas played a major role in this historical tragedy. Genocide's ideology when describing the urge of these fascist leaders to have a pure homogeneous population. Genocide's logic being negotiation, control, surrender, and submission are off the table. Thus prisoners were brought in on a daily basis, with older ones marching to their death in front of the new ones. There was no other option but death. Some were even forced to literally dig their own graves, in which the Croatians killed them in. In conclusion, it's not often that power struggles between two or more ethnicities would lead to such a horrible event like genocide. World War II saw the deaths of many innocents, but the story of Jasenovac seems to have slipped through the cracks of history. As explained at the beginning of the documentary, the Croatians kept these clips of the camps taken during World War II hidden from the world. It's not easy to link events directly to the present situation. Emotions over events such as these do not subside easily and are still felt today by some. Present-day China and Japan, Russia and Ukraine, etc. are examples of how the recent past shapes the government and people and the situation. Croatia and Serbia are no exception. Tensions have subsided in recent years, but extremism is still prevalent between the two ethnicities, and the images of the dead and Croatian heroism, just like the documentary portrayed, still linger in the minds of today's generation. No side will admit to being in the wrong, hence why the destroyed them to save us theory was used to justify an immoral decision to decide the fate of hundreds of thousands of people.